In 1987, he had 6 baby girls. See how they are now. After 36 years, welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. Have you ever faced a moment that felt so overwhelming, so completely impossible, that the entire world seemed to hold its breath, just waiting to see you fall? What if that moment wasn't a single event, but a lifetime commitment that started with a doctor's unbelievable words? For David and Sarah Miller, a quiet couple from a small Midwestern town in 1987, that moment came not with a bang, but with the frantic rhythmic pulse on an ultrasound screen. They had prayed for a child, a single blessing to complete their humble, happy life. They had painted the small spare room a soft, hopeful yellow. They had picked out a name, but what the grainy black and white image revealed was something far beyond their wildest dreams, or, as it would soon feel, their most terrifying nightmares. It wasn't one heartbeat. It wasn't two. The doctor, a man known for his calm demeanor, lost his composure, his hand visibly trembling as he recounted. 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 tiny flickering lives. The word sextuplets hung in the sterile air of the examination room, a word so rare it felt like it belonged in a medical journal, not in their lives. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, a silent gasp escaping as tears welled in her eyes. David, ever the stoic, simply stared at the screen, his mind a whirlwind of impossible calculations. 6 cribs, 6 high chairs, 6 car seats, 6 college educations. Their modest 2-bedroom house, once a symbol of their contentment, suddenly felt like a shoebox, impossibly small and unprepared for the tidal wave that was coming. The news spread through their town like a grass fire, a mixture of genuine astonishment and a kind of morbid, gossipy fascination. People they barely knew would stop them in the grocery store, their eyes wide, asking questions that felt both intrusive and naive. 6. Are you sure? How will you ever manage? The initial shock for David and Sarah slowly morphed into a deep, gnawing anxiety, a feeling that they were no longer just a couple expecting a family, but the subjects of a public spectacle. The yellow room, once a beacon of hope, now felt like the epicenter of an earthquake they couldn't escape. They were facing not just a medical marvel, but a financial and logistical Everest. And they were standing at the very bottom, looking up with a mixture of terror and a fierce, burgeoning determination. They didn't know it yet, but their private struggle for survival was about to become a national debate, and the question of how will you manage would soon be asked not with curiosity, but with judgment. By a man who thrived on predicting the failure of others, their journey from a state of quiet hope to one of public scrutiny had begun, and the weight of the world's expectations was only just beginning to settle on their shoulders. A pressure as immense and real as the 6 new lives they were now sworn to protect, no matter the cost. They were the Millers, and their story, a story of improbable odds and unwavering love, was about to be written, one impossible day at a time. The world was watching, and the first chapter was one of sheer, unadulterated panic. The joy was there, buried deep, but it was overshadowed by the deafening roar of impossibility, a roar that would soon find its most articulate and cruel voice. The birth of the 6 Miller girls, Hannah, Emily, Olivia, Chloe, Sophia, and Mia, was less a private family moment and more a meticulously coordinated medical and media event. The local hospital had never seen anything like it, and the hallways buzzed with a nervous energy that spilled out onto the front lawn where news vans were parked like vultures waiting for a feast. For a brief moment, the narrative was one of triumph. 6 healthy baby girls, tiny but fierce, each weighing just over 2 pounds. The town celebrated, signs were put up, and donations of diapers and formula began to trickle in. David and Sarah, exhausted but euphoric, believed the worst of the public scrutiny was over. They thought now, finally, they could retreat into the chaotic bliss of their new oversized family. They were wrong. The story had reached the desk of Marcus Thorne, a nationally syndicated columnist renowned for his acid pen and cynical worldview. Thorne saw the world not in shades of gray, but in the stark black and white of success and failure, and he had made a lucrative career out of predicting the latter. He saw the Miller sextuplets not as a miracle, but as a sensationalist headline ripe for dissection. His first column on the matter landed with the force of a physical blow. It was titled, "The Miller Spectacle, a Tragedy in 6 Acts." He didn't just question their finances, he eviscerated their character. He painted David and Sarah as naive, irresponsible dreamers who had, through a combination of foolishness and a desire for attention, created a social burden. He used phrases like a strain on the community, a predictable crisis, and a household built on fantasy. He skillfully twisted the town's initial support into a narrative of pity, suggesting that the community was being held hostage by the Millers' poor life choices. The article was syndicated in newspapers across the country. David read it standing in his kitchen, the newsprint shaking in his hands. The words felt like a personal violation, a deliberate twisting of their reality. He looked around at the boxes of donated clothes, the carefully assembled cribs, the sheer evidence of love and community, and saw how Thorne had reframed it all as a pathetic plea for handouts. Sarah found him there, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She took the paper from him, her eyes scanning the cruel paragraphs. She didn't cry. Instead, a cold, hard resolve settled in her features. She looked over at the 6 tiny bassinets temporarily lined up in their living room, each containing a small, sleeping miracle. "He doesn't know us," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He doesn't know them. He's just a man who sells misery, because he has no joy of his own." In that moment, the true conflict was forged. It was no longer just about the sleepless nights and the mountain of diapers. It was a fight for their dignity. It was David and Sarah Miller versus the cynical worldview of Marcus Thorne, and by extension, a world that was being taught to see them as a failure in waiting. Thorne had drawn his line in the sand, casting them as the protagonists in a drama of his own making, a drama he was certain would end in collapse and despair. He would continue to watch, his pen sharpened, ready to document every stumble, every tear, every crack in their foundation. He had made their private life his public narrative, and David and Sarah now understood they had to fight back, not with anger, but with the one thing he could never comprehend, the simple, unrelenting and powerful act of being a family. The reality of life with 6 infants was a relentless grinding marathon with no finish line in sight. The romanticized image of a bustling, happy home quickly dissolved into the stark reality of survival. Their world shrank to the 4 walls of their small house, a space now dominated by the logistics of care. The math was staggering. 48 bottles to be prepared, fed, and cleaned every single day. Over 300 diapers a week, a mountain of cotton and plastic that seemed to regenerate overnight. Sleep became a forgotten luxury, a fragmented collection of 20-minute naps, snatched between feedings and changings. David and Sarah operated like soldiers in a trench, communicating in clipped sentences and exhausted nods, their movements synchronized by a shared, unspoken understanding of the monumental task before them. David, a carpenter by trade, took on every extra job he could find. His hands, once skilled at crafting wood, now raw from mixing formula and washing bottles. He'd come home, covered in sawdust and weariness, and walk straight into the nighttime shift, allowing Sarah a few precious hours of rest before the cycle began anew. The house itself seemed to groan under the strain. The air was thick with the scent of baby powder and sour milk. A constant, low-level chorus of cries was the soundtrack to their lives. Volunteers from their church and community helped, creating a complicated schedule of shifts that brought a stream of well-meaning faces through their door. But the help, while appreciated, only underscored their loss of privacy. Their home was no longer a sanctuary, it was a command center, and they were its perpetually exhausted commanders. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability that Marcus Thorne published his second piece. He had sent a stringer to their town, a journalist tasked with digging for dirt, and the resulting column was even more poisonous than the first. Titled "The Cracks Begin to Show," it was a masterpiece of insinuation. Thorne quoted concerned neighbors, who spoke of the constant crying and the exhausted state of the parents. He described their reliance on volunteers not as a sign of community strength, but as proof of their inability to cope. He painted a grim picture of a house in disarray, of a couple on the verge of breakdown, subtly suggesting that the children were suffering from the chaos. Every struggle, every normal difficulty of raising a child multiplied by 6, was framed as evidence for his initial thesis. He wasn't reporting, he was prosecuting. The article had its intended effect. The tone of the whispers in the grocery store shifted from awe to pity, and then to judgment. A few of the volunteers dropped off the schedule, citing their own fatigue, but their averted eyes told a different story. The weight of public opinion, shaped by Thorne's cynical narrative, was beginning to crush them. David and Sarah felt the isolation closing in. They were living in a fishbowl, and Marcus Thorne was the one tapping on the glass, narrating their every move for a national audience, eagerly anticipating the moment the glass would shatter. The worst part was the sliver of doubt the articles planted. In the dead of night, holding a crying baby, exhausted to his bones, David would sometimes wonder if Thorne was right. Was this sustainable? Were they failing? But then he would look at the tiny, perfect face in his arms, at the fierce, trusting grip of a miniature hand on his finger, and the doubt would be replaced by a surge of protective fury. This wasn't a spectacle. This was his family. These were his daughters, and he would die before he let the world, or Marcus Thorne, break them. The insidious poison of Marcus Thorne's columns began to seep into the very fabric of their community, turning the ground beneath David and Sarah's feet from firm support to shifting sand. The initial wave of goodwill had been genuine, a testament to the town's good heart. But sustained cynicism is a powerful corrosive. People who had once offered help with bright smiles now offered advice with worried frowns. The narrative Thorne was spinning, that the Millers were a burden, was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. The most painful blow came from a place they had thought was a certainty. A local car dealership, whose owner had been a high school friend of David's, had publicly pledged to donate a large van to the family. It was a game-changing promise, a practical solution to the impossible logistics of transporting 6 infants. The local paper had run a story with a photo of the owner shaking David's hand. But weeks turned into a month, and the van never materialized. When David finally humbly went to the dealership to ask, the owner, a man named Gary, couldn't meet his eye. He fidgeted with some papers on his desk, the air in the polished office suddenly thick with embarrassment. "Look, Dave," Gary began, his voice low. "This whole thing, it's gotten bigger than we thought. National news. This Thorne fella," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "My partners, the corporate office, they're worried about the perception. They see this as, well, as charity, not a positive community partnership. They think it makes us look like we're propping up a sinking ship." David stood there, speechless. A sinking ship. The phrase, lifted almost directly from one of Thorne's articles, hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about a van anymore. It was about his friend, his community, buying into a narrative written by a man 1,000 miles away who knew nothing about them. "So the promise was just for show, Gary?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "As long as it made you look good." Gary flushed, a deep, blotchy red. "It's not like that, Dave. It's just business. It's complicated." But it wasn't complicated. It was simple. The fear of being associated with predicted failure had outweighed friendship and integrity. David walked out of that dealership feeling a profound sense of betrayal that was colder and sharper than any exhaustion he had ever known. That incident marked their lowest point. The stream of volunteers thinned to a trickle. The cheerful greetings in town were replaced by awkward silences and averted gazes. They felt utterly alone, enclosed in their small, chaotic house, an island of struggle in a sea of judgment. They were no longer the town's miracle. They were the town's problem. It was during this period that David and Sarah's bond solidified into something unbreakable. They had no one else to rely on but each other. They would sit at the kitchen table late at night, after the last baby was asleep, the silence of the house a temporary truce. They wouldn't talk much, but in their shared silence, there was a powerful current of defiance. They were backed into a corner, stripped of community support, and painted as failures by a merciless media. All they had left was their commitment to each other and their 6 daughters. "Let them watch," Sarah whispered one night, her hand covering David's on the worn tabletop. "Let them write whatever they want. They're not in this house. They don't get a vote." It was a declaration of war, not one to be fought in newspapers or on television, but in the quiet, daily, relentless act of loving and raising their children against all odds. Their isolation, meant to break them, was instead forging them into something stronger than Marcus Thorne could ever have imagined. Just when it seemed the walls were closing in for good, an unexpected lifeline appeared. It came in the form of a letter with the official letterhead of a major national morning news show, Sunrise America. The producer, a woman named Janice Riley, wrote that she had been following their story, including the controversial columns by Marcus Thorne. She wanted to offer them a platform to tell their side of the story. She proposed a live, in-studio interview in New York City. As a hook, she mentioned they would also be inviting Marcus Thorne to participate as a social commentator to debate the issue. David's first reaction was a visceral no. It felt like a trap, a setup designed to maximize drama for television ratings. They would be lambs led to the slaughter, served up for the entertainment of millions. "They just want to see a fight, Sarah," he said, tossing the letter onto the counter. They want to see us break down on national television. It's exactly what Thorne wants. But Sarah, ever the pragmatist, saw it differently. She picked up the letter, her expression thoughtful. "And what's the alternative, David?" she asked quietly. "We stay here and let him define us. Let him poison everyone against us without ever saying a word in our own defense. We're already in a fight. The only difference is, right now, we're not even in the ring." Her words hung in the air, sharp and true. She was right. Their silence was being interpreted as guilt, their retreat as weakness. Hiding was not a strategy, it was a slow surrender. The decision was made. They accepted the invitation. The network flew them to New York, arranging for a team of experienced nurses to stay with the girls. Stepping into the bustling, brightly lit television studio felt like entering another dimension. It was a world of artifice and performance, a stark contrast to their raw, unvarnished life back home. They were ushered into a green room, where a monitor showed the live broadcast, and then he appeared on the screen. Marcus Thorne, looking smug and confident in a tailored suit, was already seated on the interview couch, chatting amiably with the host. Seeing him in the flesh, so to speak, sent a jolt of nervous energy through David. This was the man who had, from a distance, caused them so much pain. Soon they were being led onto the set during a commercial break. The lights were blindingly hot. A makeup artist dabbed powder on David's forehead. He felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He sat down on the plush couch, Sarah beside him. Marcus Thorne sat opposite them, a thin, condescending smile on his lips. He gave them a cursory nod, his eyes sweeping over them with an air of detached analysis, as if they were specimens under a microscope. The host, a man with a famously warm persona, introduced them, and the interview began. The initial questions were soft, about the girls' health and their daily routine. But then, the host turned to Thorne. "Marcus," he said, "you've been very critical of the Millers' situation. Why?" Thorne leaned forward, a predator sensing an opening. He launched into his well-rehearsed arguments, his voice smooth and authoritative. He spoke of societal responsibility, of the narcissism of wanting such a large family in the modern age, of the inevitable psychological toll on the children. He was articulate, polished, and utterly devoid of empathy. Then, he turned his gaze directly to David. His voice took on a tone of feigned sympathy that was more insulting than open hostility. "Mr. Miller," he said, the words dripping with condescension, "let me ask you a question that I'm sure many of our viewers are thinking. Looking back, with the struggle you're now facing, do you ever regret not choosing selective reduction, for the sake of the children you could have properly provided for?" The studio fell utterly silent. The camera zoomed in on David's face. It was the kill shot, a cruel, intimate question designed to shatter his composure on live television. Sarah's hand tightened on his arm. This was the moment. The trap had been sprung. The entire country was watching, waiting for his response. In that heart-stopping moment of silence, with millions watching and the smug face of Marcus Thorne waiting for his victory, something shifted inside David Miller. The anxiety that had been churning in his stomach vanished, replaced by a profound, crystal-clear calm. The anger he felt wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, focused, and powerful. He didn't look at Thorne. He didn't even look at the host. He looked directly into the lens of the main camera, understanding in that instant that his audience wasn't in the studio. His audience was in living rooms across America. People who understood struggle, who understood love, who understood family. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and measured, devoid of the emotional breakdown Thorne had so clearly engineered. "That's an interesting question," David began, his tone almost conversational. "It assumes a lot of things. It assumes that providing properly is only about money. It assumes that a life, or 6 lives, can be measured on a balance sheet. It assumes that love is a resource that can be depleted, that a parent's heart can be divided until it's worthless." He paused, letting the words sink in. He could feel the atmosphere in the studio changing. The crew, the host, everyone was leaning in, captivated. "You see, Mr. Thorne talks about costs," David continued, his gaze still locked on the camera. "Let me tell you about the profits. I get to see 6 different smiles when I walk in the door at night. I get to hear 6 different laughs. There's Hannah. She's the leader. Even at this age, she's got a look that can stop you in your tracks. There's Emily, who giggles if you just look at her. Olivia is the calm one, the watcher. She just takes everything in. Chloe is our little fighter. She was the smallest, and she's the fiercest. Sophia has this incredible gift for sleeping through any noise, a skill I envy every single day. And Mia hums when she's happy. A tiny, wordless song. As he spoke, the camera operators, against their usual protocol, slowly pushed in on his face. He was no longer just a guest on a talk show. He was a father, bearing witness to the truth of his life. You ask me if I regret not reducing my family. I'll ask you a different question. Which smile would you have me erase? Which laugh should I have silenced? Whose song should never have been heard? He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting Marcus Thorne's for the first time. The smugness was gone from Thorne's face, replaced by a flicker of stunned disbelief. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. David's voice dropped, becoming even quieter, yet carrying more weight than ever. You see 6 burdens, Mr. Thorne. 6 problems. 6 lines on a budget sheet you think society has to pay. I see 6 miracles. I see 6 blessings. I see my daughters. And frankly, I pity you for being unable to tell the difference. Sarah, who had been sitting in silent support, placed her hand on his, a gesture of profound solidarity that was more powerful than any speech. The host, visibly moved, looked down at his notes, seemingly at a loss for words. The silence that followed was not the tense, awkward silence from before. It was a silence filled with respect, with awe, and with the undeniable, earth-shattering power of a simple, honest truth. David and Sarah had walked into a trap, and with nothing but their dignity and their love, they had turned it into a pulpit. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and utterly reversed. The broadcast ended, but the story was just beginning. In the moments after David's speech, the switchboards at the television network lit up like a Christmas tree. The sheer volume of calls overwhelmed the system. It was an immediate, visceral, and national response. People weren't just moved, they were galvanized. They had witnessed a public shaming backfire. In the most spectacular way, they had seen a quiet, decent man stand up to a cynical bully and win, not by stooping to his level, but by rising above it with unshakable integrity. The interview became the most talked about television moment of the year. In the pre-internet age, it went viral through word of mouth, through newspaper articles that recounted the stunning exchange, and through rebroadcasts of the clip on evening news programs. The narrative had been ripped from Marcus Thorne's control. He was no longer the sharp-witted social critic. He was the heartless ghoul who had suggested a father should have erased his own children. His own newspaper was inundated with angry letters and phone calls. Subscribers canceled in droves, specifically citing his disgusting and inhumane treatment of the Miller family. His editor, a man who had previously celebrated Thorne's ability to stir the pot, called him into his office. There was no debate. The Miller story was over for him. He was told in no uncertain terms to drop it permanently. We can imagine Marcus Thorne sitting in his expensive office, staring at his own column. The headline, "The Miller Spectacle," now reading like a monument to his own arrogance. His face, usually set in a confident smirk, was pale and drawn. He had built his career on the idea that he understood human nature, that he could predict its failings, but he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had mistaken quiet dignity for weakness, and deep love for foolish sentimentality. He hadn't just lost an argument, he had been exposed. His public persona was shattered, revealing the hollowness beneath. For David and Sarah, the change was immediate and overwhelming. When they returned home, they were no longer a local spectacle. They were local heroes. Awaiting them was a deluge of support that eclipsed anything they could have imagined. Letters poured in from every state, thousands of them, filled with words of encouragement and personal stories of struggle and triumph. Tucked inside many of these letters were checks, $5, $20, sometimes hundreds. A national baby food conglomerate, seeing a PR opportunity, but also genuinely moved by the story, called and offered them a lifetime supply of their products. The car dealership owner, Gary, showed up at their door, his face a mixture of shame and desperation. He practically begged them to accept the van, which was now parked in their driveway, complete with a giant red bow. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing," he admitted. "People I haven't heard from in years, calling to tell me what a fool I've been." David, looking at the man's genuine remorse, simply nodded and accepted the keys. There was no "I told you so." There was no need. The catalyst for this incredible reversal wasn't a single hero or a powerful institution. It was the simple, resonant power of their own truth. By refusing to be victims, by speaking from the heart, they had activated a dormant nationwide community of decency. They had reminded people that family, love, and resilience were values worth defending against the erosion of cynicism. Their fight for dignity had been won, not in a quiet, private victory, but on a national stage, and the rewards were now flowing in, washing away the stain of judgment and isolation. The years that followed the interview were a blur of beautiful, chaotic, ordinary life. The national spotlight eventually faded, as it always does, leaving the Millers to the monumental task at hand. But now with a crucial difference. They were no longer alone. The financial pressures were eased by the outpouring of support, and the emotional burden was lifted by the knowledge that they were seen, respected, and admired. The narrative had been permanently rewritten from spectacle to inspiration. The house, once a symbol of their overwhelming struggle, became a testament to their love and efficiency. It was a whirlwind of motion, a symphony of organized chaos. David built extra shelving, bunk beds, and a massive dining table where the entire family could eat together. Sarah became a master of logistics, her days planned with military precision, yet always leaving room for the spontaneous moments of joy that defined their lives. The narrative of the passing years could be told through a montage of snapshots, each one a quiet refutation of Marcus Thorne's dire predictions. We see 6 toddlers in matching dresses, a tangle of limbs and laughter, learning to walk in a pack. We see 6 little girls on their first day of school, holding hands in a formidable line, their faces a mixture of excitement and trepidation. David and Sarah are in the background of every shot, their faces aging, lines of laughter and worry etched around their eyes. But their expressions are ones of deep, unshakable contentment, not the haggard desperation the world had been led to expect. The teenage years arrived like a tidal wave. 6 sets of hormones, 6 battles over curfews, 6 first heartbreaks. The challenges were immense, but they were the normal, universal challenges of parenthood, amplified by 6. The house echoed with slammed doors and loud music, but it also echoed with 6 times the laughter, 6 times the secrets shared late at night. They navigated it all with the same united front they had shown the world years earlier. A central feature in their home became a sprawling wall of fame in the hallway. It started with 6 tiny baby photos and expanded year by year. School pictures, team photos from soccer and softball, clumsy drawings, and honor roll certificates. It grew into a dense, vibrant tapestry of achievement and memory. The ultimate addition to the wall was a row of 6 high school graduation photos, 6 identical caps and gowns, 6 unique, triumphant smiles. On graduation day, as they watched their daughters walk across the stage one by one, a local reporter who had followed their story from the beginning asked David how it felt. David, his eyes misty, simply said, "It feels exactly right, like this was how it was always supposed to be." The house that was supposed to be a place of chaos was a place of deep-rooted connection. The girls, while fiercely individual, shared a bond that few could comprehend. They had their own language, their own alliances, their own unwavering support system. They had grown up against a backdrop of public expectation and had emerged not as damaged products of a stressful environment, but as resilient, confident, and compassionate young women. They had been raised not just by their parents, but by the love that had defied a nation's skepticism. The sinking ship that Gary, the car dealer, had been so afraid of, had turned out to be an ark, safely carrying its precious cargo through the storm and into a bright, promising future. Fast forward 36 years from that fateful day in the doctor's office. The year is now 2023. The small house in the Midwestern town is quieter now. The whirlwind of activity has settled into a comfortable peace. David and Sarah, now in their late 60s, move with the easy rhythm of a couple who have shared a lifetime of profound experiences. The wall of fame in the hallway is now overflowing, spilling onto other walls, a testament not just to childhood, but to accomplished adulthood. The 6 tiny babies who the world watched with bated breath have grown into 6 remarkable women, each forging her own distinct path, their lives a stunning final answer to Marcus Thorne's cynical questions. Hannah, the born leader, the one with the look that could stop you in your tracks, pursued a career in law. She became a prosecutor, driven by a fierce, innate sense of justice. She fights for victims, her voice in the courtroom echoing the same quiet strength her father displayed on television all those years ago. Emily, the giggler, channeled her infectious joy and empathy into medicine. She is a pediatrician in a bustling city hospital, her waiting room filled with the sounds of children's laughter. She has a unique gift for calming frightened kids and their anxious parents, a skill she learned firsthand. Olivia, the calm watcher, the one who took everything in, became an architect. She designs beautiful functional spaces for communities. Her work celebrated for its harmony and thoughtful integration with the environment. She creates order and beauty from complexity, a direct reflection of her upbringing. Chloe, the little fighter, the smallest and the fiercest, found her calling in the military. She is a major in the Air Force, a decorated officer who has served multiple tours overseas. Her resilience, forged in a crib surrounded by 5 sisters, now serves her country. Sophia, the one who could sleep through anything, ironically became an entrepreneur who barely sleeps at all. She launched a successful tech startup that develops educational software for children, driven by the belief that every child deserves the best possible tools for learning. And Mia, the one who hummed when she was happy, became an artist. Her large-scale, vibrant paintings are famous for their emotional depth and celebratory feel. She still hums when she works, her studio filled with the same wordless songs of contentment from her infancy. Today, they are all gathered back at their childhood home. The occasion is David and Sarah's 40th wedding anniversary. The backyard is filled with the women, their partners, and a new generation. David and Sarah's grandchildren. The air buzzes with laughter, conversation, and the joyful chaos of a large, loving family. It is the ultimate picture of success, a living, breathing portrait of everything Marcus Thorne declared impossible. They are not a burden on society, they are pillars of it. They are not damaged, they are deeply empathetic and strong. They are the 6-part harmony of their parents' greatest love song. The anniversary party is in full swing, a perfect golden hour light filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree in the backyard. David stands off to the side with Sarah, watching the beautiful chaos unfold. He sees Hannah in a deep discussion with a local judge, Emily chasing her giggling toddler across the lawn, Olivia showing him a blueprint on her tablet, Chloe in her dress uniform, sharing a story with a group of rapt cousins, Sophia closing a business deal on her phone with a grin, and Mia sketching the entire scene in a small notebook. 6 lives, 6 worlds, all connected, all thriving. Later, as the sun sets, Hannah taps a glass for attention. The chatter dies down, and all eyes turn to her. She stands beside her parents, her expression full of emotion. "A lot of people for a long time saw our family as a story about odds," she begins, her prosecutor's voice clear and steady. "The odds of survival, the odds of success, the odds of our parents just staying sane." A ripple of knowing laughter goes through the family. But they were wrong. This was never a story about math. It was a story about chemistry, the incredible, unbreakable bond between these 2 people. She looks at David and Sarah. They were told they were being irresponsible. They were told they would fail. A man on television even had the audacity to ask our father if he regretted us. Her voice catches for a moment. What the world saw as a burden, they saw as a blessing. What the world called a spectacle, they called their family. They absorbed the pressure, the judgment and the doubt, and they reflected it back as pure, unconditional love. They taught us that you don't listen to the voices that doubt you. You listen to the ones that believe in you. And if you can't find those voices, you become that voice for yourself and for each other. She raises her glass to Mom and Dad. You didn't just give us life. You taught us how to live it. Thank you for everything. As everyone toasts, David looks at his 6 daughters, their faces illuminated by the party lights, and then at Sarah, his partner in the most impossible, wonderful venture imaginable. A lifetime of love, struggle and triumph is reflected in her eyes. The narrator's voice returns, a final reflection on the journey. They said it was impossible. They called it a spectacle. They waited for the cracks to show, for the entire structure to collapse under its own weight. But what this family proved is that the predictions of cynics are utterly powerless against the foundational forces of love and determination. They weren't a social experiment. They were a family. And their legacy isn't about the odds they beat, but about the unshakable love they built. So the next time you hear a story, the next time you're tempted to judge a situation from the outside, remember the Millers. Remember that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the richness of human connection. And remember that the most powerful response to a world that says you can't is to quietly, steadfastly, and lovingly build a life that proves you can. The greatest victories are not won in arguments, but in the living of a full and courageous life.